Newcastle 1. Race officer speaking. Pressure coming here, pressure coming. We're 1.5 below. 2 dives here, boys. We're looking at 10.5 and 42.
Hi everyone, great to have you along for another edition of the podcast. I hope wherever you are at this crazy time that we find you healthy and managing to stay in good spirits. It's not easy. This is the start of season 2 of the pod. It's a big day in our house, so a real heartfelt thanks to everyone who has supported us over the year and for all the brave guests who took it on with a beautiful honesty and openness. Also, of course, to the talented Tim for his energy, unwavering attention to detail and his undying enthusiasm for the podcast. A big thanks also for all the feedback on the last podcast. Ian Percy was a popular listen and a great way to wrap up our first season. What he had to say touched many of us and went way beyond boats. Your interaction is really important, so please keep it all coming. Let us know what you think, rate and subscribe. Now, we both feel it's important to keep the podcast going through these tough times and to somehow endeavour to maintain the essence and quality of what we've been doing so far. We may not have flown to Sardinia to delve into the America's Cup world as we'd planned. This month's guest only lives just around the corner, but he's a real treasure. His storytelling skills are well known, and there's not much in the sailing world that Australian Nick Moloney hasn't tried. I've known him a long time, but it turned out I didn't know half of it. From tales of record-breaking windsurfing across the Bass Straits, winning the Jules Verne Trophy with Bruno Perron, to cheating death, sailing alone twice, Nick has really crammed it all in. If you had ever thought of doing a Vendee Globe, Nick's account of his race is a must listen. In this 2-part pod, prepare to be impressed by this lovable, honest Aussie. Now, it all may sound a little different to normal. We're obviously recorded this podcast in line with social distancing rules. As I've said, Nick lives just around the corner, so didn't travel to record the pod. He came in the back gate to our garden and sat outside, far further away than one would normally sit for an interview. He even brought his own refreshments. So enjoy the added bird song and the occasional laughter from the neighbours' little ones. And if there's moments when I seem to be shouting, then please cut me a little slack. I hope you enjoy the time I spent in the garden with Nick Moloney.
What I found over the horizon was another world and something that really still inspires me today. I was this kid that didn't say boo, and Peter Gilmour got me painting the fence at his house. And then John Bertrand called me up for 1995 and I was like, wow.
Nick, thank you so much for doing this. Weird times, I know. But as we discussed at length, we're really keen to give our podcast listeners something to keep them engaged in the sport at this difficult time. So we've adhered to social distancing rules. It does feel weird. You're quite a way further from me than you would be. So thanks so much for doing this. We're not going to dwell at all on the whole isolation thing, but I guess as an offshore sailor, a solo sailor, this must be something that people are asking you about how to cope with feelings of isolation.
I think personally, obviously my thoughts extend to everybody who's affected by it, and we're all expressing that because it is quite a worrying time. But the big difference with us is that we train for it, we plan for it, and it's in our goals and our schedule in some respects. So we're very ready, and in comparison, to not take anything away, my personal situation is quite stable, and I can feel like I've had a connection to vulnerability, distance, all these sorts of things that we're experiencing now. We have really significantly trained for that in our lives and in our careers. So I feel like I'm coping quite well, missing my kids dearly, which I would do normally. They're in France, unfortunately, but I would do normally if I was at sea. And And there's a sense of vulnerability amongst us all, and we have that very, very much so when we're sailing around the world, for argument's sake. So it is what it is, and you just got to wish everyone all the best.
It's a beautiful day here in Cowes, isn't it? It's sunny, 20 degrees, flat calm, and I know you're a big paddle boarder. I bet you're really wishing you were out there.
Absolutely. The water is something that's been with me all my life, and it is, I guess, my release. It's something that provides me great mental stability, and it's my physical training. I'm not a really good gym goer, and I'm very much one for getting outdoors and getting in the water, and that's my access to fitness and health, mental and physical. So it is days like today, and wow, in the UK, I think coming from Sri Lanka to the UK to transition to a new phase of my career, if you will, I was thinking, dark clouds and rain endlessly. But in fact, the weather we're experiencing is amazing. So a lot of people that I know that are desperately missing contact with the water right now.
Now, Nick, your reputation as a talker, as a storyteller, is well founded. So we're excited to have you on the podcast. It must be, I guess, your perfect medium. No sound bites required. Take as long as you like with your answers.
Thank you. You might need a while.
I mean, there's an oft-told story from back at the start of a big offshore race. The boats had all left, hadn't they? And you were working with the TV guys, just sat down for dinner, and you started to tell a story. You know where this is going. Our longtime friend and colleague Andrew Priest tells of how Tim, the editor, of course, of the podcast, he ate a nut salad. He's allergic to nuts. Big issue ensues, 2 ambulances. Priesty takes Tim to hospital and eventually comes back to the restaurant, sits down, and you're still telling the same story. It is true, isn't it?
It is completely true. And to be honest, I look at the connection that I've had with storytelling and I guess media, and in some sense, it may be perceived as selling myself. It's been a really difficult thing for me because my whole career has been corporately funded, and I've always had a really strong focus on the return on investment association to that. And that has called for, at times a lot of interviewing and a lot of writing and a lot of pieces to camera, etc. And that's not necessarily by choice. But I don't know, I just ended up talking too much. And I think coming back into, I guess, the focus on some of the ambition I have ahead of me after a break, and I took a period away from the sport. I was sick of a few things when I took the break. One was being wet all the time. One was being, not home. And the other was I got sick of myself. And it really is a downside, and I don't think people really understand that, how hard it is to continually push out content, to continually talk about yourself, to continually tell stories in hope that somebody will get something out of that or enjoy it in some way. So I think coming back into it, I'm a bit like, okay, if this is a new beginning, then be careful to not bore everyone to death.
Oh, Nick, it was a compliment. We love your stories. The last time you were sailing was an incredible trip to Antarctica. I mean, not long back, with an Irish research project led by Irish Volvo Ocean Race legend Damien Foxall. I mean, that must have been amazing. If you've not seen the photos, listeners, check out Nick's Instagram account. It's incredible. I mean, how extraordinary was that for you?
It was absolutely mind-blowing, to be honest. I think I've dreamt of going to Antarctica for a very long time. Probably all my sort of, mind transitioning life, I guess. But rounding Cape Horn and knowing that it's not far away, those sorts of experiences, seeing icebergs and thinking of the White Continent. But you really need purpose and reasoning to go down there. It is a place that is quite sacred in some ways. It's pristine, and that was one of the first things that I'm a high tide scourer. I look for plastic at high tide, and that gives me an indication on ocean health. And it was absolutely pure in every sense down there, and I felt very strongly about my presence there. Never felt more responsible for my actions anywhere else in the world. So that was really exciting, and the purpose for me, or the trigger really, was that it was the 200th anniversary of the discovery of the continent. So that was the catalyst to really make the decision. And I was super fortunate that I had the opportunity to go with Damien. Damien, Brian Thompson and myself shared a house in the days of PlayStation and the race and, back in that era. And we're very, very great friends. He's an amazing seaman. He's an adventurer. He's brave, and he's full of energy. So for me, it was just fabulous to share that time with him.
When I asked you to join us for the podcast, Nick, one of the things you said which surprised me was, I'm not really worthy. But you really have done everything there is to do in the sport. I mean, you've had the craziest, diverse and successful career. Why did you have that reaction?
I think just maybe watching some of the previous podcasts and these people, the people that I admire so immensely, Ian Percy for argument's sake, and I don't know if I really see myself to have done anything exceptional in the sport. I've fortunately won more than I ever dreamt I would ever win, and I'm not allowed to put awards or trophies or pictures even around the house. Never really have been, but they all hang out in my mum's house, and I remember when I do go home to mum's, I'm like, wow, actually I did a few things, but it has been it's one of those things. I never really committed to one thing and didn't go for an Olympic gold medal for argument's sake, and I dabbled with a lot of things and actually felt like I saw them through to a point of credibility, but I'm pretty impatient. Not when I say impatient, that's probably not the right word, but I love discovery and I love learning. And I think for me to spend, and this is not taking anything away from anybody, but for me to spend a career or my lifetime chasing 0.2 of a knot of boat speed, I just wasn't up for it. And I experienced it, but I wanted such massive diversity. I wanted to suddenly go from sailing a mini transat boat, 21 foot long, oceanic little boat, to sailing a 110 foot catamaran. For me, that was like, whoa, and the learning transition was incredible. And I love that. I loved being so out of my depths, and I'm an absolute avid learner. And I feel like I'm a bit of a battler. I like to find my own way and get there in the end, and hopefully walk away from, I guess, all these disciplines that I've taken on. Hopefully I've walked away with a pinnacle moment, and that's important to me.
Okay, let's go back to the beginning. You grew up in Ocean Grove, a small town at the entrance to Port Phillip Bay, near Melbourne in Australia. I mean, it looks like something out of Home and Away. If water sports are your thing, it's got to be the best of both worlds. Wild ocean on one side of the town and a sheltered bay on the other. I mean, how much did you appreciate all of that?
It's really strange. I think I appreciated it from as far as I can remember. Never neglected it, never overlooked it. And I have a really strange affiliation with the sea. It's really comforting to me. And I've had years of my career where I've very clearly spent more time at sea than I have on land. And I've been very comfortable in that environment. A lot will be able to back up that I'm not a great vehicle driver, for argument's sake, and I'm really a lot more comfortable driving a boat at 35 knots than I am driving down the highway in some respects. So it's a place that I feel most at peace, most comfortable, safest in a lot of cases, and it's the most familiar territory for me. So I don't think I ever really overlooked that. I remember laying in my bunk at night and hearing the surf hitting the shore. What an amazing sound, and we had an environment where somebody would get up in the morning and cruise through where we lived yelling out, "Surf's up," and that was crazy. And we'd all fly out of bed and grab our boards and run down to the beach at dawn and dive into the water and go and surf all day. And I was really, that was where it came from for me, the sailing connection, because I didn't have any family members that sailed, and I certainly didn't come from wealthy background, and that was the perception, was you had to be wealthy and you needed club access and all the rest. But the Melbourne to Hobart race and the Melbourne to Devonport race, they start the day after Boxing Day every year. And for us to stand on the beach in Ocean Grove and look at those white triangles go over the horizon, for me that was so incredible. the most adventurous thing that was happening on the planet on that day and in that moment. And I really literally said to myself one day, I want to do that. And every time I go over the horizon, I still feel fortunate that I feel like I honoured that promise, and I still love it. What I found over the horizon was another world, and something that really still inspires me today.
Describe the young Nick Moloney. I mean, was he sitting in his class at school dreaming of the surf?
Definitely. The young Nick Moloney was a daydreamer completely, and it's quite funny. I did a lot of work with Victorian Institute of Sport. I was leading an extreme performance group with the likes of Mark Webber, Ep1 pilot, etc. So it was a really, really amazing environment. And I remember we worked on various different elements, getting in the zone, etc. But visualization was a big thing. And I spent a lot of time with our psych team there. And the reality for me, or what I feel, is that we're all visualizing from a young age, and it's a really key strength we're identifying in a corporate sector, in sport, etc. now. But in fact, it's just daydreaming to me. And I daydreamed all of my childhood, all of my teen years, and I think it's a really strong quality in later in life to let your mind wander, think things through, particularly in sport where there's so much planning and there's so much preparation, to be able to visualize the goal. And for me, the stronger that visual element becomes, the closer you are to the ability of achieving that goal. And I've lent on it so heavily throughout my life.
It's perhaps not so great when your grade cards come back from school.
That's sure. My mum, bless her, she had many, many tears coming back from parent-teacher interviews and all the rest. And I was just recognised recently at a school high achievers evening, and they made these big sort of posters that they will keep in the school that will hopefully inspire the kids of the school. And Mum went and accepted that sort of accolation on my behalf, and she said to me it was one of the few times I left that school not in tears. And I wasn't a difficult child in terms of I wasn't in trouble. I was very straight, and I was quite quiet as a kid, very focused, and but I certainly wasn't academic, and that was probably something that my mum in particular would have liked me to have been, and I just couldn't find it. And it's strange because I spend a fair bit of time with youth now, and always have, and it doesn't, who you are in your teenagers doesn't necessarily mean who you will be later in life. And once I discovered sailing and really got into the racing, and there was the strategic side and a trimming and rig bend and all the aspects associated with the finer points of detail in sailing, I studied day and night, aerodynamics, fluid dynamics, went through book after book after book. Yet to that point, you couldn't get me from cover to cover on anything. And it was really that I fell in love with something, I found a deep interest, and suddenly became the biggest learner.
When did you know that sailing and adventure was your thing?
I wanted to do it when I was younger. Again, didn't really know how to get involved. I started sailing on the river, as you mentioned, between the ocean and a body of water called the Bowen River, which was equally divided. We had one a land spit, and I remember meeting a guy who was renting out boats to the paying customers over the Christmas and holiday period, and just pestering him to have a go, and helping him rig them up and pack them up at the end of the day, just hanging around. And he let me take boats out, and I remember low tide, I'd sail over to a sandbank and I'd feel like I was Captain Cook, that was me. And I remember laying, very, very clearly, I remember laying with my cheek on the deck, and just little laser radial, and just listening to the water and just thinking, this is amazing. And my first introduction was really a next door neighbour had a catamaran and a Mosquito, and he'd take us out sailing on that. And I was really, really drawn to it. And I'm not sure I really felt, we really didn't have a career path in it in my day. You were going to be a plumber, which is what I did for an apprenticeship, and then you were going to sail on the weekends. That was it. And but I always knew adventure, completely new adventure. And I think in my mid-teens, I was either resigned to wanting to be a professional surfer or a professional sailor, and neither really existed at that point. Surfing, I guess guys were doing well out of it. I wasn't a great surfer. And then I was fortunate to win a couple of state championships in one season, and I thought to myself, maybe I could do this, and maybe I could be able to travel with this. Then I started traveling. One of the awards for the state championship event was a seat at a North U smart course or fast course, I can't remember which one. And I sat with John Bertrand, Iain Murray, Grant Simmer, the legends, Australia too, you know, all the rest. And they took me under their wing in some respect and gave me the opportunity to go to Sydney and sail there. I sailed with John on his etchels and things like that. So it was a crazy, crazy scenario for me. Suddenly there was opportunity, and I was this kid that didn't say boo. I just wouldn't speak. I was very quiet. And when I first went to Sydney, we were working on the 12 metres back in those days, and we ran out of work, and Peter Gilmour got me painting the fence at his house. Iain Murray was building his pitwater home at the time, so we were all around there doing what we could around the house. They kept us on and they kept us working, and then they sort of feeded us through to various other opportunities in the sport, which was really, really amazing, and I'll never ever forget all that assistance back in the original days, for sure.
I mean, how do you go from hanging around at the beach club and sailing, you know, a bit in Australia, to being a young 24-year-old and part of the Ilmora team led by Paul Caird in the 1992 America's Cup? I mean, how does that even happen?
Yeah, it's crazy, to be honest, because as I said, we didn't have any connection, but the reality is you don't need to be wealthy. Kids, particularly in the youth, there's so many kids that are looking for partners to sail with them. It's a really difficult sport to find access to fill a regular crew basis, particularly in the youth. So I think understanding that early, or at some point, and going sailing for the first time at a yacht club in my football jumper and my surfing wetsuit didn't matter. When you're kids, nothing really matters. You're just having a good time. So for me, you know, that was really insightful. But I wanted to be in the big boats right from the early stages, and I think that's because that's what inspired me. So I'd walk there's Admiral's Cup IOR days for those listeners who may remember that era, and Australia was really competitive in that scene. And most of those boats were training in Melbourne because Port Phillip Bay was a really good body of water to train in. So I was walking the dock and just asking, and it was crew weight back in those days. So if you were 40 to 50 kilos as a kid, you're filling a gap. So I got the chance to experience that. And then things went on and on and on. Obviously that was a real catalyst for me when I got some support from Ian and Peter and those guys. But I was working for North Sails, and I'd been through a process of learning everything about boats. We built 2 boats, we poured the keels, we bought aluminium masts from Alcan, we made the mast, went to the sail loft, made the sails, and went out and raced these boats. And in every case, we had good results in these boats. So I felt like I had some skills to offer. North Sails, and then Sid Fisher was putting a campaign together. And that was a bit of a bottom line campaign. You know, it was underfunded. It wasn't what we'd call the Darlings, and that was the Spirit of Australia back in those days, because they were from Darling Harbour. We called them the Darlings, and they had so much more access to knowledge and the various than what we did. And I think for every Aussie, like Iain Murray, he cut his teeth in the America's Cup with Sid Fisher, and so many other people have. I think it's a bit of a rite of passage for a young Aussie to go on tour with Sid, you know, in Ragamuffin or in the America's Cup. So I left Australia with Sid, and it was pretty evident early that we weren't going to progress well. So round robin 1, I started transitioning. I was working with Challenge Australia and Spirit of Australia. So then I was working alongside Grant Simmer, Tom Schnackenberg, all these amazing greats of the sport for those who remember that era. And round robin 2, Ilmora de Venezia contacted me and said, hey, can you come and give us a hand? And And I was like, wow, I couldn't believe it. And it was in the loft primarily, and I was still helping Sid and then trying to honour the opportunity that he gave me, and he was super, absolutely super. And this is back in the day where you would go to the America's Cup, you'd hand over your return ticket, which was paper, and your passport. So if you fell out with the campaign, you didn't know if you were going home, you know. So fortunately Sid was really supportive and gave me his absolute blessing. And I went to Gilmour and I was with this unbelievably professional team. We had 5 America's Cup class yachts on the hard stand, an amazing pool of talent, you know, the Kiefe brothers and all the rest was just amazing. And I got to sail on the B boat with John Collius and Stevie Erickson and some big names, and it was amazing. It was just amazing to be in that level of professionalism, and it happened so quickly. And I really struggled with I didn't struggle, I was really devouring it, but I was really surprising myself as to how quickly this could go. And why? I've asked myself several times, and I think it's because I was head down, just head down. Firstly, try and understand everything that you possibly can in the sport, like, you know, how masts work, how, you know, lift versus drag ratios, etc. But do your time so you can help people repair masts. You're prepared to stand the bottom for as long as it need be, and just get on with it, and not get involved too much, particularly in the America's Cup, in the politics side of things. Just head down, crack on, and the opportunities will come. And I think because I wasn't a threat to anyone, the opportunities were there.
What was Caird like? I mean, he's been on the pod, of course, and has great tales from that time sailing for the Italians. What was he like as a boss?
Well, he was. I didn't have a lot to do with him in 1992 because he was the man. You know, like he was wow. You know, driving the Ferrari, and he was just like everything you'd aspired to be as a professional sailor. You know, and incredibly talented without question. And then I spent some time with him again. I was coaching Pirates of the Caribbean, and then I was coaching Artemis in America's Cup for San Francisco in the transition into multi-hulls. And it was great. You know, he's one of those guys, particularly I think with the Pirates of the Caribbean. It's all this lead by example, and we see it so much in the sport. And I couldn't recall Paul's age at the time, but so fit, so physically fit and strong, and so committed to the project. And again, you know, I've been lucky to sail with people that just have exceptional depth of knowledge, and he's certainly one of those guys as well. So, yeah, it was great.
From my memory, in '92, it was a massive deal. I remember watching it in a bar in Livorno. It was like Italy were in the World Cup final. I mean, what did the young Aussie make of all that?
Oh, it was so emotional because the Italians are so emotional. I'll be honest, I'd struggled to find, I'd grown up with a family that was really big on football, and that's a brotherhood. And I struggled to find that in some circles in the sailing, where you've got that really strong team environment. But wow, Gilmour was mind-blowing. It was the passion and the emotion, and the team was deep. You know, there's probably 200 people working for the syndicate. And we were all so well looked after. There's such small things like who didn't get certain clothing or whatever else that can bring America's Cup teams down ridiculously. And they just looked after the littlest person in the same way that they would the afterguard of the cup boat. But I think that journey to go to the America's Cup, and I think it's probably a very different experience, and I'm fortunate to not have ever been there in a team I've been involved with, but to bow out early or to not have been in with a show would be hard to swallow. And to be in a team that gets to the America's Cup, to get to the show, the main event, wow. And I learned a lot in that campaign. I was very disillusioned by the America's Cup when I first went, because I aspired to it, as I think every young sailor does. Is that the pinnacle, the America's Cup? And to be honest, when I got there in 1992 with the Australian teams, both Challenge Australia and Spirit, I was a bit like, is this the pinnacle? People were amazing, the ambition was incredible, but it was difficult, really difficult grind, and I felt like we were so out of our depth from a lot of sides. resources, finances, knowledge, if you will, you know, particularly when you look at the Kiwis and teams like that. So that was really daunting for me, because I aspired to this America's Cup, and then there I was, and I was like, really? And I really struggled with that. And when I got back from that particular tour, I actually took a break and I went and worked in the outback for 6 months to get away from sailing. And well, I took a time, I sailed for a bit, and then I took a break, and then John Bertrand called me up for 1995, and I was like, wow, this is my childhood hero. I'm coming, you know. So it was really another story, and it drew me back in.
I mean, that's a moment, isn't it? When you pick up the telephone and it's John Bertrand. Do you remember it?
Oh, look, I remember it really clearly. You know, really the reach out came initially from Grant Zimmer, and then I had a conversation with John, and that's a childhood hero. So, and I was really flattered just to even be asked. So for me, a lot was happening, and I was like, really, me, you know? And I knew it was going to be, it was going to be the A team. Sid was campaigning with Sydney '95, and but we were going to be the strongest representative that Australia put together for some time. So so I was really, what an amazing opportunity.
I mean, how different did it feel on board Australia One, part of your, you know, a nation's campaign with a good chance of delivering?
That was really impressive. I really thought, there's no question, and even in the aftermath, when I think of it now, that was my best chance for Australia to actually try and win. And when you look at it in reflection, the Kiwis were the only team that stood between us in the America's Cup. They took us down in the Louis Vuitton Cup final, and the American showing that year wasn't very strong. So whoever was really going to win the Louis Vuitton Cup final was going to win the America's Cup. So we were a lot closer than we really, when we say that, we're one boat closer, but that boat was really dominant in comparison to us. So I think that was exciting, and I'll never forget being in an America's Cup race with John Bertrand on the boat, going upwind. I remember I was grinding for the main sheet or something, and I remember thinking, wow, here I am with the king, you know, and at this echelon of the sport, and you only get a really brief moment to think about that before you've got to be in the zone the whole time, obviously. But I remember having that really small moment of trying to take it in and thinking that was pretty exceptional personally, you know.
What kind of leader was John Bertrand?
John was amazing in a lot of ways, and I've spent a fair bit of time with him. He's a very dear friend, and he's pretty quiet, to be honest. He would sit in a meeting and not say a lot, but then break the meeting and just give his thoughts on the situation. And at that point, it's like, yeah, you know, it's like while we're beating around the bush, and for anyone who knows the America's Cup Worlds, there's a lot of talk and a lot of debrief and all the rest of it. And for someone to be able to consolidate like he can is really amazing. And in that big team environment, Rod Davis was helmsman as well. So he and John were sharing some of that role, and John was in the strategy and the tactic and afterguard element. And at times I felt like he wasn't really on the race course showing how exceptional he is as a sailor, because it's so diluted in the afterguard, you know, with Glenn Burke and all these amazing sailors, and everyone's got their opinion and their roles. And, you know, we were certainly the best in Australia, particularly at the back of the boat. And but then not long after the America's Cup, I remember John went into the Australian Nationals, I believe it was, in the Etchells, and he smashed it. And half of the America's Cup team was there. So it was like, you know what, he's just laid it down again. And in that small boat environment where you get to prove yourself a lot more, he just re-established his status as such an incredible sailor.
He still is.
Still is.
He's
still doing it, you know. I don't think I'd ever been more excited about anything in my life. I'd come out of the hatch at some point and I'd just punch the sky and go, we're doing the Whitbread. He just looks up and looks me straight in the eyes and says, this is awesome.
from the Cup in '97, you were on Toshiba, Dennis Connor's challenge for the Whitbread Round the World race. I mean, I'm wondering if you made a list of legends you wanted to sail with and then started ticking them off. Kayard, Bertrand, and then DC himself. I mean, how did you end up with him on the Whitbread?
It's really strange. And to sort of give you a little bit of an insight into where it's at today, you know, I'm not long into my 50s, and I grew up with John and Dennis, as you know, the 83 America's Cup was such a big thing for us kids in Australia, and I admired both skippers, one for winning the America's Cup obviously in 83, and the other for coming back to Australia and defending and getting the cup back, you know, what he felt was rightly his after an enormous amount of ridicule and difficulty for losing it in the first place. And for my 50th birthday, I received a video message from John and a really lovely email from Dennis. And that's something that as a kid, you wouldn't dream of. And these people, I'm still in awe of. But and I think the really strange thing for me is to be able to consider them as friends. And I'm so fortunate for that. But the whole DC thing and the whole Toshiba program, John was actually looking at doing a Whitbread campaign out of the 95 America's Cup, and myself, Andrew Cape and Alan Smith were brought in initially to look at that, the possibilities of that campaign going forward, and it never progressed. And Andrew Cape was given the opportunity to navigate Toshiba, and I will forever be in absolute debt to Capey and in such deep gratitude that he took me with him, and Alan Smith as well. So he kept that core three of us together, and we went to Toshiba, and we had to trial out, which was pretty scary to be honest, because Chris Dixon was the co-skipper of the campaign, and he was certainly going to be the most predominant leader at sea. And I'd race a lot against Chris in the match racing tour, etc. And I was scared of the guy for sure. You know, we're actually really good friends now, and I have complete admiration for him. And actually, when you work out somebody who's so intense in the sport, when you work out that all they're asking of you is to give everything, when you work that out, they're easy to win over. I remember Chris, you know, lots of stories with Chris really where you had to prove that you knew what you were talking about. And Dennis is the same. Dennis would ask you a question that he completely knew the answer to see if you knew the answer to that particular question, if you knew what you were talking about. And I think if you studied hard and you worked hard, then you easily fitted into those sorts of campaigns. And you know, it's really some fabulous times. And I think Chris certainly pushed me to be a better sailor than I've ever been at that point, for sure, particularly offshore. And you know, for that I'm super grateful. And Dennis is Dennis. You know, he's such a compassionate guy compared to what, you know, everyone says big bad Dennis or ruthless Dennis Connor, but he's a softie, complete softie. And I'd never ever sailed with anyone who had such complete knowledge of boats, sails, rigs, foils, strategy, tactics, whatever it might be. But in terms of the boat package, he absolutely knew everything. Had spent so much time working on or learning about every element of what makes a boat go fast. And that really struck me. I just thought he was just the full book of knowledge. And he was a funny guy, you know, he'd always have a bit of a joke, and he'd say, you know, oh, Lindsay, apart from me, who do you think's the best sailor in the world? And the first time he asked me, I answered John Bertrand. He nearly threw me off the boat. But you know, we'd have some great chats and some really good laughs. And to be honest, I was working on the mast once. It was in Fremantle, and Dennis came, and he'd just walk around with us as he would and just chat to us, you know, find out how we're going, really sincere in that respect to make sure that we're all emotionally good. And he'd say, oh, Lindsay, what do you want to do after this? And I was like, oh, I don't really know, you know, right now I'm just focused on the task at hand and, you know, trying to keep my job type thing. And he said, oh, what about that mini transat thing? And I went, oh yeah, I've thought about it, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, I reckon you should do that. And he helped me. You know, at the end of the Whitbread, he helped me. He and Murray Ross sort of helped me find my way in that. And Dennis even went on a further measure to help me. And it was great. It was really sincere, you know. So that was super cool.
Back then, the Whitbread was a proper big adventure. How excited and how apprehensive were you?
I don't think I'd ever been more excited about anything in my life. And I remember after 1995 America's Cup thinking, I'm going to need something else in this sport. I remember even towing home after the days and days of testing and just looking at the horizon and thinking, oh, I probably should be on the horizon, not sailing around in circles type thing. And again, I don't want to take anything away from the America's Cup because it's such an amazing, amazing thing. And I've got some dear friends in it and I absolutely admire and am inspired by what they're doing. But for me, there was something else. And I remember the trial we did in San Diego, and we were told we were going to find out in 3 weeks' time, but I was told on the last night of the trial. And I remember leaving the gathering straight away and going back to my hotel room and calling my parents in the middle of the night, and I was jumping up and down on the bed in my hotel room. I was so excited. And I just wanted to it was really important for me to see the Needles on departure of the Solent, which was the course back in the day, starting and finishing at Southampton. And it meant so much to me to see the Needles again on return and having sailed all the way around the world. And that was a big thing. And I put up there was some social media recently, and one of the guys who worked with us in the team, who was our shore guy, top man, he mentioned that I was coming out of the hatch and punching the sky saying, we're doing the Whitbread. And I was so excited. In every leg, I would think I'd come out of the hatch at some point and it could be rough or it could be beautiful or whatever, and I'd just punch the sky and go, we're doing the Whitbread. And if the boys hadn't had enough copy, they'd tell me where to go, but it was a real genuine expression for me. And once I got into that race, I was like, this is where I belong. This is so adventurous, this is so extreme, this is so hardcore, this is real yachting for me. And I was so taken by it. And I was so fortunate to be with such an amazing team of people. To this day, all of them my brothers, and I'll be forever grateful for them to allow me and take me around the world with them. And some of the things we saw and some of the things we did were just mind-blowing. Yeah, great race.
I mean, from memory, there was a lot of crew changes on Toshiba. I mean, a change of skipper after leg one. What was the dynamic like?
The dynamic on board was really good because we trained a lot. We were pretty young, and actually I'd go as far as to say as we were a pretty wild bunch. There was certainly no PC element associated with the campaign, so we were young, we were going out a lot, and we were pretty tight as a unit. And I think we had so much leadership. You had Ross McDonald and Paul Stanbridge, Andrew Cape, all these people on board that were such amazing sailors. And when you consider that team, everybody on the boat originally had either sailed in the America's Cup, done a previous Whitbread, even won a previous Whitbread, or the Olympic Games, and most had a combination of all three. So the talent was enormous. So when we had our first real changeover, that was from Chris to Paul stepping up as a skipper, I think we just looked at each other and said, well, the core is still there. I was personally, I thought we would lose the plot a bit because Chris reined us all in and kept us professional. And I was worried that without his leadership in that sense, that we would get a bit relaxed. But in fact, our next leg was the Southern Ocean, and you've got to be grown up in that environment. So it was a good transition for us. But Paul Stanbridge was his major influence for me. He was the modern day pirate, and he really brought out adventure in that trip for us. and it was somewhat, it wasn't a race. It was, but it wasn't. It was transitioning, I think, at that time. That race has always been competitive, but it was so much more of an adventure back then. And he was really sort of bringing us young bucks really into making sure we didn't overlook that and making sure that we had a great time. I tell a story with my time as the race ambassador for the Volvo Ocean, probably overtold it, but really important to me was coming into Cape Horn and it was just howling, and we were charging downwind, and I'd just been driving, and I got off the helm, and you default onto the grinding pedestal, and I was so stressed, and I didn't want, we were all rocking out of control, and Stanbridge is facing me on the grinding pedestal, and we're covered up, so we've just got the letterbox with our eyes hanging out, out of our wet weather gear. We're just so heavily clad, and Capey's yelling out, there's an iceberg on the bow, and there's just waves just thundering, big sheets of water just engulfing us on deck and flooding the cockpit, etc. And we're doing probably speeds, well excess of 25 knots, and it's dark and it's scary, and that night Silk Cut hit ice, and there's dismastings and all these sorts of things were happening. It was one of those nights at sea where you go, we're going to remember this night for a very long time. And as Capey was sort of feeding back to us from down below, my heart's like bursting out of my chest. And, Paul's our leader, and I sort of look up through the waves and just a gap between my wet weather gear, and I'm like, man, this is full on. And I'm expecting him to say to me, Dorry Lonesy, it'll be daylight soon. We'll get a different perspective on it. We're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. He just looks up and looks me straight in the eyes and says, this is awesome. You wouldn't miss this for quids, And suddenly that nervousness just fell away from me, and I was just like, you know what? This is the most amazing sailing I've ever experienced in my life, and absorb it, take it for what it is. And this is a night I'll remember for a long time, and make sure that you appreciate it. And crazy times. Yeah.
What was your first time in the Southern Ocean? I mean, how did you find it?
A lot of unknown, to be honest, to go down in the Southern Ocean first. And I remember really clearly coming out of a press conference, I'd started writing, and I really love writing. And I'd started writing in legs, and they gave me an opportunity to go to a couple of press conferences and represent the boat. And I remember walking out of a press conference, and Grant Dalton was there, and he's like, you're in for the ride of your life now, Nipper, or something like that, and Dalt's is, great admiration for the guy. He's a legend, absolute legend, and I've always admired everything that he's done. And I walked away thinking, without doubt, some level of arrogance, because I'm like, well, I've seen a bit of action, like I'm 28 or whatever I was. I've seen a bit of action. Surely they can't be that bad, We've all been in storms before, Sydney, Hobart, and all the rest of it. But boy, when we got down there, it was so humbling. And I remember we were scared, really. We say we weren't scared, and there's times when I think we were all together in it, and we certainly found humour. I don't know how we found humour in that scenario. We'd have big crashes, like wiping out with spinnaker up in the snow and big squalls, and then just lose control. And after we'd regathered our composure, we'd find some humour in it, and it was a really amazing strategy in terms of dealing with that. But I just looked around at times and went, I'm with the craziest bunch of people in the world, And it was super intimidating. It was awe-inspiring when you look at the size of the waves, the speeds that we could achieve, snow in the Southern Ocean, all those sorts of things were it was dynamic. Everything you expect in storms and hard running conditions, it was all there. And that's the beauty. It's the beauty of the Whitbread Round the World race or any of those round the world races. As sailors, we aspire to experience everything that ocean and nature has to throw at us or offer us. And when we think of heat, we think of the equator. And when we think of storms, we think of the Southern Ocean, big waves, etc. And a round the world course is beautiful in the way that everything is there in its enormity. Everything we would ever want to experience is there in its absolute most powerful form.
So all of that early on in your career, and then back in 1998, quite incredibly, you windsurfed across the Bass Straits. I always remember your mum in a TV interview saying that you couldn't actually windsurf. I think she might have been a bit harsh, but I love that. I mean, how tough was it, and why do it?
It was it was quite funny because my friends at the time would say the only reason why I got there is because I didn't know how to turn around. So it wasn't far off me not being able to windsurf. But during the '95 America's Cup, I was living with Adam Beashall and his partner Lainey, who now is his wife, and she's probably get this wrong, but 4 or 5 times Olympic rep for the US in the windsurfer. And she windsurfed from Newport, California to Ensenada in Mexico. And in 1995, I navigated for her. And I thought to myself, wow, I wonder if that's possible. And really very baseline windsurfing capability. And then I went back, it stuck with me. And actually in the Whitbread, I sat on the rail a lot and I started to put the vision together. And I came back to Australia and I think the real draw was that nobody had ever done it before. And in this day and age, it's really difficult to be the first at something. So I started putting it together. And it was one project. I had an idea that I would like to campaign for myself at some particular projects. And it gave me the opportunity to come up with an idea or a project concept, a goal, and find the support for it, whether that be short support, certainly financial support in sponsors, to execute the project and to, I guess, follow up with the media, etc., associated with the return on investment. So I used it as a full-scale project really for myself to see if I could actually do that. And if I couldn't put all those pieces of the puzzle together, then the other dreams, such as the Vendee Globe or whatever else, would be so far-fetched. You just wouldn't even bother with the whole idea. And it's a transition because there are a lot of schools of thought. Do you stay in sort of TP52 racing or RC44 or all these other things, and does that become your niche? And that's your unit of network, and that's where your work comes from effectively. Whereas for me, I knew I was going to bounce all over the place. So I'd have to find a way of making it happen myself without the reliance of anyone else. So I'd look back on it now and I'm like, what was I thinking? That's the dumbest thing that I've ever taken on in my life. But wow, crikeys, what a day. Such a huge day. And the process really was taking 4 hours of windsurfing a day to 14 hours of windsurfing a day. An enormous amount went into that project. Probably don't really maybe have the time to talk through it, but there's a few key points that were the building blocks, and that was understanding how to get to that point of being able to windsurf from Big Island to the island state of Tasmania across what is known to be one of the most notorious bodies of water in the world. But take the weather out of it, it's shark infested, and growing up on that coast, I'm very aware that place is full of sharks. So I did a lot of different things. I knew that I'd hit the physical and mental pain barrier, so I set myself up to do that. I did a 230 kilometre bike ride, didn't train on my bike or anything, just turned up on the day with my food provisions that I'd take on the windsurfer and just go. Did like 20 kilometre fun runs, not trained for them, but set a goal, start, finish, don't stop. A lot of stuff that I'd taken away from mentoring. During the America's Cup, we had a guy, Mike Mackay, who was an awesome foursome rower, multiple Olympic gold medalist, and they left us with really small nuggets of ways to prepare ourselves mentally. So I learnt really heavily on those. And even the shark side of things, with the sharks, I'd windsurf out at night time and drop the rig in the ocean and lower my body into the ocean and just hang out there. And the first time I was doing it, every little flicker of a wave, I was like, there's a shark fin, just freaking myself out completely. And then I think first time I only did it for probably 15 minutes. And then next time was a bit longer, next time was a bit longer. And then I got to the point where I felt like the sharks weren't that interested. So I sort of got over everything. Then the day came and it was just time to go. But that day itself was just a massive day.
What was the best moment in the day?
Certainly finishing was the best moment of the day, that's for sure. But a lot happened. Roger Badham was my weather advice, and I'd obviously worked with him in the America's Cup and several other elements. Amazing man. And he said, okay, have a go. It's easterly, which is not normal for the region. He said, have a go. If you don't get beyond the light air transition in the first 5 hours, come back. So I did. I ended up just scraping through. But anyway, strong easterly in the middle was pushing me along. I was in foot straps and harness for a long time, 9 hours, just trying to get as far across the strait as I could. And I'm looking at my GPS on the board, and the breeze is building, and I'm bearing away because I've got one rig, right? Can't depower or anything. So I'm bearing away to try and depower through running deeper, and looking at my GPS and realising that I'm missing Tasmania. So I'm looking at a westerly transition off the northwest corner of Tasmania, and next stop's Antarctica, So I was like, whoa, I better, somehow find that course back again. So I leant in my harness really intensely, and I was really working hard with my feet in the foot straps, etc. And I just got a lot of injuries from that. And if you're up for a bit of gore, I can elaborate a little bit more. But I'll move on. And yeah, I got quite sick, and I couldn't eat. I couldn't take on fluids. And fortunately, the wind abated enough for me to be able to come back on course. And I remember very clearly the really difficult thing for me was I had programmed into my GPS that I could see the lighthouse of the port that I was aiming for. That beam would extend 12 nautical miles offshore on a clear night. And I'm looking at my GPS, and it's like 12 nautical miles to go, and I can't see the light. 10, still can't see the light. There's a really light sea mist over the ocean. And I'm like, oh my God. And I started to panic and think, what if I put that wrong coordinate in the GPS? I could be anywhere. And I just kept going, and just believing that I had prepared well, and just believing that I'd come to the right place. And sure enough, I saw the light, and then that was sort of where you start to think, okay, we're going to make it now. And I'll never forget actually arriving. I had a blood nose and a few other things going on. And I never forget arriving, and there was a journalist on the dock, and I laid on the concrete, and he comes up to interview me. When he looked at my face, he just stood back and went, oh my God, look at this guy. He's destroyed. And I was destroyed. I had black eyes the next day and all the rest of it. Yeah, it was a tough day. Tough day. Put a fair bit of pressure on myself that day.
There we have it, podcast listeners. We're leaving it there for now. I hope you're enjoying listening to Nick. For sure, he wears his heart on his sleeve. There is still much to enjoy. Part 2 is already published, so if you're keen to know what it's really like to be a round-the-world record breaker, to be alone and frightened in the mini Transat or the Vendee Globe, Nick talks about it all in his own eloquent and honest style. No filters. Check out Part 2. It's compelling. Please, as ever, let me know what you think about the podcast at Shirley Sale on Instagram and Twitter, or just me on Facebook. And please do remember to like, review and subscribe on whatever platform you're joining us on. It'd be great to know what you thought of Nick's pause, or any of the others in the library now online. As ever, the podcast is expertly produced by Tim at Vertigo Films. Thanks, Tim, you're a legend. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Stay safe, everyone.
This is Castle 1. Race officer speaking. Pressure coming here, pressure coming. We're 1.5 below. 2 dives here, boys. We're looking at 10.5 and 42. This is Castle 1 standing by. Out.